So Ocean's 11, 2-5, 800 effective?
800 cap.
800
We're
cap.
actually 4,000 effective.
Oh, wow. So you're having a
And
good session,
yeah,
huh?
yeah, it's pretty good. And
Yeah.
the main villain covers us. So hero has queen of clubs, queen of spades, and small blind.
Okay.
Under the gun one raises 30. Hijack calls. He's the main villain. And then hero three bets to 200.
So let me ask you a quick question. So there was no straddle in this particular hand?
Nope.
So a straight open to 30, was that typical? Just out of curiosity.
It was getting a little loose. This particular undergun villain, I think, probably not a winning player. He
Mm-hmm.
was getting loose.
Wow,
Yeah.
30. Okay. So obviously you're going to three
Yeah.
bet here, right? So plus one opens to 30, hijack calls. And, a
Yeah.
really, really easy way to do this. Is everyone 4K effective, including the flat caller in the field, or is he shorter?
No, no. I'm exceptionally big at the table as is the main villain. Everyone else is probably between 500 and 800.
Okay. So did you cover the table, and do you always cover the table?
That night, yes.
All right, that's an inside joke. Hopefully, the YouTube viewers will get that. There was a guy that made it clear last week that he would cover the table, and the person that he was in the hand with, even though he had like 4,000, had like 500, but he kept saying 4,000 effective. But the easy way to do
Yeah.
this is, four times the raise size plus a caller. Too. The reason why I asked you how deep the flat caller is obviously that's going to be relevant to playing, from out of position. But I mean, you could make this 125 probably to one. I mean, excuse me, I would probably make this 150 plus here.
Okay. Gotcha.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, because you're out of position, right? What did you do?
So that was going to be my first question. I raised it to two. I three bets to 200 just because I was out of position. Do you
I
think
mean, I
that's
don't
too
think
much?
it's no. I mean, it's not too much, especially if a guy's like opening loose. And again, I'll go back to what I talk about. You see these weird things in the computer solvers where at like 100 blinds, specifically so that you deny the implied odds of set mining, you'll see a reflection of like
Mm,
gigantic three bets, like 6 to 7x, which is weird, right? Like you see some of these non-intuitive. I don't think it's a mistake.
okay.
By any means. I think what I would say in terms of a live exploit, which I tend to do, which some people could pick up when they're playing against me, is the less my hand is actually vulnerable in terms of the property of my hand, the smaller I'll actually raise. Meaning that, like, I want the action with aces,
Right.
right? You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So, whereas with
Yes.
queens, you've got a couple of, obviously overcards that you're going to think. So, plus one calls.
Undergoing actually folds
Oh,
and
okay. Plus
hijack
one.
calls.
So, plus one folds, hijack calls. And how
Yeah.
deep is the hijack?
He covers.
Oh,
He's
he's the
about
one. Okay.
4.2K.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
thought.
we're 4,000. He's 4.2.
All right.
So
So
he
you're
covers.
deep. You're deep, and you're out of position against
Yeah.
the hijack, and the pot's probably going to be what, like 440 or something, 430, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. He's 430.
Okay. So 430. Yep.
Okay. So flop is seven of diamonds, four of clubs, jack of hearts,
Seven of diamonds, four of clubs, jack of
four.
hearts. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Here and hero leads 200,
Okay.
and hijack raises 500.
Do you have any information about the hijack, by the way?
Yeah. So of all the players on the table, I think he and I were probably the only two thinking players. Somewhat laggy. He was having kind of like a swingy session, but he had made a comeback and now he covered the entire table.
Well, so we're gonna do a call. I think maybe this week. We're talking about this is where it's interesting, and I'm going to be, like I said, looking into some of this. There's a little controversy out there on 2+2 this week where some German guy who sort of came up the ranks, like it's been found out that he was using like a real-time solver in online play, and that this shit has happened like all the time, right? I started thinking to myself, I'm like, man, like people aren't even necessarily poker players in the sense that, a lot of newer players that do well they dog on a lot of old school people because the old school people, maybe they don't use solvers, they don't know the optimal solutions, but like who's actually cut their teeth more? The people that didn't use those tools or the ones that did? Now, the people that did use those tools have a huge advantage and probably are better fundamentally sound players, but they're just basically memorizing and understanding how certain boards interact with certain ranges, certain optimal ranges in given situations. And if you run that enough, you start to learn that stuff. Now, if you add on to the fact that you already were a good poker player, you can see how powerful that tool is. The reason why I say this is because I always find it interesting, just even in a live dynamic. First of all, a double flat is not usually going to be a thing. Double flat being like flat 6x and then call again to a 3-bet. So that's way out to lunch anyways. Blows up a solver multi-way with this type of sizing. But if you just kind of plugged in like a normal 3-bet scenario from, even if it was like a +1 scenario here as opposed to a hijack, it would be interesting to see how they bucket this flop at this stack depth. And that's why, like I said, I'm going to start using these tools because I don't know off the top of my head what type of sizing is optimal here. Not that I would use it, it's just interesting to note, because what I would say is that queens probably, need some more protection than aces and kings. The board is not all that connected. If this was a +1, and then you can see the difference, right? If it was a +1 open versus a hijack open, because, if it was a hijack open, let's say it was Jack 6-4 instead of Jack 7-4. If it was a hijack open, then the hijack's going to have all the sets. If it was like a +1 open in a 9-handed game, maybe the +1 doesn't have any of the sets except for jacks, right? Because they're an opening 6s and 4s. But you don't know what their actual pre-flop range is. It's just interesting to how this particular flop in this configuration would get somewhat bucketed. I'm just interested in what you're supposed to do in terms of bet sizing here, heads up, with this pot size. Usually like a half pot size bet, for whatever reason, isn't one of the sizes that they choose, although I feel like it does a pretty good job because it will still get worse to call. Sometimes like when you actually want some fold equity, it's kind of, sometimes I feel like betting half pot is a little bit, I wouldn't say necessarily more efficient, easier to do what I want to do in the pot versus say 1/3 the size of the pot. If you can follow me there. Maybe it's just because I have a comfort level with like right around half the size of the pot. Obviously, you have to continue here. I mean, I think it would be way too nitty to fold. But you're obviously not liking the spot. By the way, too, so that's why I wonder sometimes at the stack depth, super deep, you're almost 1,000 blinds effective, although the sizing makes it so that you're really not, right? The pre-flop sizing, this must be reflected as a check some of the time, almost for like pot control, too. So you bet 200, he raises to 500. Okay.
Yep. We call. Yep.
So
pot
here
is
calls
1430.
Okay, 1430.
Yep. Turn is 6 of hearts, and we check.
So Jack of hearts, 4 of clubs, 7 of diamonds, 6 of hearts. You've got queen of spades, queen of clubs. You bet 200, raise to 500. You call. Pot's 1430. Turn is the 6 of hearts, so it puts a backdoor heart draw out there now, too.
Yes.
Okay.
And then surprisingly, hijack.
So you check. You check, I assume, right?
Correct.
You check. Okay.
And hijack leads 800.
Hijack bets 800.
Right.
You're in the small blind, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. Usually, I just semantics. So the leads usually from my position. Sorry. I was just getting confused. Yeah. So he bets 800 into 1430. So you still, if you call here, the pot's 3,000, and you will have
less than. I'll have like 2,500 left.
2,500. So it will be 3. I mean, obviously it's so he's taking a sizing here that is not optimal either, by the way. It's usually going to be like 1/3 or over bet. Not that it means anything, it's just interesting to note. I mean, would I fold off now? It's probably pretty close, but I think that sometimes you can play this old school game of Fifth Street Chicken where sometimes I'll call again here, and then if you see a non-disconnected like straight card, this guy's gonna have the balls to really fire. Again, 8-9 by the way gets here, which is just sort of a gut shot. It's just interesting the double flat, the pre-flop flat, and then the huge the 3-bet defend. It's like, yes, he could have sets. It's a very narrow range, but I think I would continue and then check and evaluate.
Okay.
And then again, it goes back to, I don't know what the river is, but if the river is even a brick here, like a deuce, and, say for example, you check and then the guy like moved all in, people would be like, well, how can you call the turn if you're going to fold the river? Well, the river bet in itself is changing the hand. So
Yeah.
you can call here, you're getting almost 3-1. You could call here thinking that, you have 25% of the 25% equity. Then on the river, the equation changes. I mean, that usually comes into play sometimes too when there are two pair combos out there where you have equity with an overpair against two pair types of things, which doesn't really look like that's going to be a thing here on Jack 4-7 unless the guy's super out to lunch. But I wouldn't hate a fold if you're not necessarily comfortable playing the river. What did you do here?
So I tank folded. I just didn't have a plan for the river because I wasn't sure what I would do if he obviously shoves. Even if it's a disconnected card. At that point, I was just wondering what sort of hand would call a 3-bet pre-flop after flatting. And it just, I just wasn't sure what sort of range I'm beating at that point once he leads the turn on that 6 of hearts.
I mean, he would have to, yeah, I mean, he would have to have enough. He would have to be the type of person where you think he has enough bluffs and understands the types of hands where he would be bluffing here enough. Some people said like 5-6 of clubs here or something like that. In order for you, obviously, would he start a raise? I mean, like an ace 4 of hearts or something like that. It's just, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I wouldn't lose sleep over the fold here. And, but sometimes I just sort of revert back to though, too, on that there's just a lot of times you might, you actually get a free showdown sometimes too, even against hands that should get value from you. And then people just give up. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge amount of money, right, for this level to be able to pull a bluff. But did you ever find out what the guy had?
Yeah, so I showed him my queens just to see if I can induce him to show, and he showed, and he had 5-6 off. So
5-6 off, yeah. 5-6 off?
Pair plus combo.
Wow, this guy looks like he's trying to outplay you, man.
I think he did outplay me. He won.
Well, if you call that, I mean, that's why. I mean, it would be interesting. It would have been interesting if the river was a brick. And this is why, like I said, also too, like you get to see some rivers that change things. Like, if the river's an 8 or if the river's a 3, I mean, obviously that changes a bunch of things, right? But then if the river like pairs the board, like a jack or a 7, then I'm probably never folding, right?
Right.
Especially if he's going to 3-bet like pre-flop with jacks. So, the river in itself will actually say something about the hand. And then also too, you get to force him to either to go for it or not. You know what I mean? But I appreciate the call. Yeah. Thank you very much. If you like what you've seen here, please hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this call-in hand, hit the like button down below. To check out crushlivepoker.com, click on the link in the description. Use the code YTA300 to get the first 30 days for free.